Hello, everyone. This webinar is presented by Ellen Bristol, that's me, and Linda Lizakowski of Bristol Strategy Group, entitled Why We Need a Fundraising Revolution, Fundraising the Smart Way and Evidence of a Need for Change, presented on behalf of the Philantrepreneur Foundation. Let me first introduce my co-presenter, co-author, and partner, Linda Lizakowski. I have had the great pleasure of working with Linda for several years now. We co-authored an important book together. Linda is a kind of scary person who's written more than a dozen books on fundraising and related topics. She holds the most highly regarded designation for fundraising professionals and is one of only slightly more than 100 such people holding the ACFRE Advanced Certified Fundraising Executive, and she's been a nonprofit consultant for 22 years. That's one more year than me, Linda. And I can also tell you that Linda has a background in corporate sales, where she was a banker.
And I'd like to introduce my friend Ellen, who you've already met through her brief introduction to this program. What Ellen didn't tell you about us co-authoring the book is we met actually online, had never known each other. She's in Florida, I'm in Nevada. We had never met, but we got to meet each other and found that we did indeed both come from corporate backgrounds, and both of us felt that we had a lot to offer the nonprofit community by taking some of our business sense and business experiences and translating them for the nonprofit organization. So Ellen was telling me about her study, which you'll hear a little bit more about, the leaky bucket assessment. And she said, well, to sum it up in a few words, it's what's wrong with your fundraising and how you can fix it. And I said, that's a great book title. Let's write the book. And so 90 days later, believe it or not, the two of us had a manuscript produced and ready to go to print. The leaky bucket, what's wrong with your fundraising and how to fix it. And Ellen herself is also an author outside of the book that we co-authored together. She's written Fundraising the Smart Way, which you're going to be hearing a lot more about. But the whole concept that Ellen and I have in common is that we want to see this predictable, consistent income growth for your charity, that we really believe that nonprofits can benefit from the experience that business leaders have had over the years and over decades, really. And we want to now introduce some of these concepts to the nonprofit world. And it may be new for some of you in the nonprofit world to look at things in this light, but we hope that when you leave this webinar, you're going to feel a lot more secure and a little comfortable with the business concepts that we're going to talk about. But Ellen is a performance management guru. She's been involved in that for a long time. So I think you're going to benefit from her experience and hopefully from mine as well. There are people today looking at metrics, but what we're finding in this is kind of some scary information. First of all, some of you who are members of AFP, the Association of Fundraising Professionals, may be familiar with a project that AFP and the Urban Institute have kind of co-authored, and it's called the Fundraising Effectiveness Project. And what was scary about the results from this is that so many nonprofits focus on, oh, how many new donors did we get and how much money did we raise this year? And what they don't focus enough on is how many donors did we lose this year? Nobody wants to look at that side of the picture. I find people in the nonprofit world, and I've been in it for a long, long time, we tend to be eternal optimists, and we're always looking at the good side. But unfortunately, sometimes you do have to look at the negative aspects. And what they found in this fundraising effectiveness project in 2012 is that for every $100 gained, there was $100 lost. So where's the profit in gaining new donors if you're losing donors? And for every 100 donors gained, 105 were lost. So we're actually at a net loss instead of a net gain in number of donors. And this is a scary concept to me because losing donors is really sad. Donor retention is so important, and this whole fundraising effectiveness project focuses on how are we going to retain our donors so we don't see this negative figures plummeting downhill every year. Giving USA also reports that charitable giving, if you look at it as a percentage of gross domestic product, it's really been flat. We look at it every year and the dollars seem to be going up, and we think, well, that's great. We gained more money in the charitable sector this year than we did last year. But if you compare it to inflation and other things that are going on, it's pretty flat. The highest level of increase was only 2.25% in 2006. And nobody really was questioning much about these statistics until June of 2013. And some of you may be familiar with Dan Pallotta's work. He wrote some wonderful books, including Uncharitable. And he was saying, why are we looking at this overhead ratio? So many groups get really hung up on this, and board members tend to really focus on, well, we have to keep our overhead down because we want to be able to report that 96% of our money went to programs and only 4% went to overhead. And it's really a fallacy. The overhead is going to be different for every organization. Sure, organizations that have been raising money for 100 years and have it down to a science and have a full professional staff and have the latest in software, they can probably keep their costs down a little bit. But for example, I just got a text this morning from someone who wants to start a brand new nonprofit organization, and their overhead is going to be higher. So we can't get so hung up on this concept of how much are we spending, and boards and sometimes CEOs are going to be on your case all the time about, well, what is our overhead? We got to keep the money down. We got to stop spending money on fundraising. And Ellen and I have always said what we really need to say is we do need to be spending more on fundraising, because for most
Right.
organizations, they should be investing more in their development program, not less. So, Ellen, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you talk a little bit about the leaky bucket, since we've sort of teased them with this concept.
Sure. Well, let me just add one comment to this slide deck about how much what about the percentage of gross domestic product is represented by charitable giving. What's really interesting to me about that statistic is that the nonprofit sector is growing. More people are coming out of college and choosing careers in the nonprofit sector than ever before. There are more graduate schools offering degrees in nonprofit management and public administration. There are more people employed, but we're not seeing the commensurate rise in the income and expenditures of that sector. So there are many contributors to these, as Linda phrased them, scary statistics. But one of the contributors, which we feel is underrepresented, is the establishment of performance targets and those famous KPIs, key performance indicators, which have been proven in commercial businesses to make a significant contribution to productivity. I'm going to talk more about productivity in a moment. In our leaky bucket assessment, which is now collected about 1,000 surveys, or responses, I should say, we measured 9 simple, basic business practices, and we're going to talk about a few of them. But what we discovered was, out of this entire large database of responses, you can see that 77% of the responses fall below the midpoint. So the actual so basically the sector as a whole gets a grade of about C-, in terms of its productivity and its efficiency and effectiveness. And you can see that only about 4% of the organizations that responded came out with a score we'd consider watertight. So they're either leaking like a sieve or they're slightly better at quick call the productivity helpline. But we've got some serious challenges to address here. And we believe that these challenges have a significant impact on fundraising, a significant downside impact on fundraising effectiveness and some of the other challenges.
Talking about scary, that 4% is a scary one. I think that only 4% of nonprofits are really watertight. So that in itself should make you all sit up and take notice. And if you haven't taken the leaky bucket assessment yet yourself, we're going to tell you at the end of the presentation how to do that, so you can find out where you fall on that list. And hopefully some of you are in that watertight or at least the next highest level. But
even before we jump into discussing the leaky bucket statement 9, Linda, I just wanted to make a comment. Knowing that such a small proportion of development shops really have a tight, well-organized productivity machine tells us that money is leaking through the cracks all over the place. The collective bucket is pretty leaky, and it certainly correlates with the Fundraising Effectiveness Project's data.
Right. And we're not going to tell you about all the statements in the leaky bucket. You can find those out for yourself. But the one that we want to focus on was the 9th statement, the last question we asked. And this is one of the things I think that probably scared us more than any of the other results. Is the question is, what practice does your agency use when fundraising results fall below desired levels? And we all have probably been in that situation where we didn't meet our annual fund goal, or we ran a capital campaign and fell short of its goal, or somehow we just missed the mark. And the answers that most people gave us, almost half the people said they either host more events or they write more grant applications. And what scared us about this is these are areas that oftentimes are much more costly, much less effective than some of the other options that they were given, such as get training for our staff and board, to improve our case for support. Those are the things that are usually fairly low cost and much more effective. Hosting another special event when you already have 12 every year is not the way to go. And yes, sometimes write more grant applications can help. But when you look at Giving USA statistics, they show that foundations only supply about 14 to 16% of all the charitable giving in this country. So instead of focusing on things like hosting events, which are labor intensive, they're volunteer intensive, the staff gets frustrated, the donors get burnt out, or, focusing on just sitting in a corner and writing grants, these nonprofits ought to be focusing on the things that are going to improve productivity and at the same time probably reduce their costs. What they're doing basically is, we always like to say, they're throwing a tactical solution to a strategic question. The reason that your income fell below desired levels might not necessarily be that you lost $10,000 on an event. It's, are you running too many events to begin with? So you've got to look at the strategic issues and not so much at the tactical ones. And this is comes down to being a leadership problem. A lot of times it's our boards and our CEOs that are pressuring us into meeting goals. And so we're just throwing up anything we can think of to make this happen. And it's not always the best thing. We need to look at it in a much more strategic way.
Many of you may have read Jim Collins's book, Good to Great, or his monograph, Good to Great and the Social Sector. And what he says is we need to face the brutal facts. So if we're not getting the traction we desired from fundraising, let's sort of peel back the onion and figure out what contributed to those results rather than pulling a Chicken Little and throwing bake sales and car washes, right?
Right, absolutely. And what we're talking about today is proven not only by the statistics and the data that we've acquired, but it also comes a lot on empirical evidence. What people have told us, and as Ellen has said, I've been in the fundraising consulting for more than 20 some years, and several years before that as a practitioner, and even before that as a volunteer fundraiser. And Ellen likewise has been around long enough to know that this is the kind of things that people talk to us about. One of the things that people tell us with our board members is the biggest challenge is getting their board members involved in fundraising. I think 95 or if not more percent of the organizations that I talk to, when I ask them about what are some of their challenges to meeting their goals, it's, well, our board members say they'll do anything, but they don't fundraise. They're great people. They love our organization. They're really committed to our mission, but there's no way they're going to get out and help with fundraising. And unfortunately, you get this, the kind of the last thing on here, begging for money. Very often is board members look at fundraising as with that, what I call the tin cup mentality, that they have to stand on a street corner with a tin cup begging people for money. And that's not at all what fundraising is. We really need more education and more passion from our board members who really love our organization. But if they really truly love the organization, they should be happy to go out and share your mission with other people, and the money will come as a natural outgrowth of that.
Well, I wanted to add to your comments, Linda, and one thing I want to make sure everybody knows is Linda wasn't suggesting that the solution to all your problems is to flog members of the board to be better at raising money.
Right.
It's really not that simple, and there's an argument to be made to get the fundraising, to get board members out of the fundraising game altogether. But the key thing that we see is the notion that fundraising equates to begging for money, or that there's no good way to manage either fundraising staff or fundraising results. But the key thing we do see from anecdotal evidence is everybody in the nonprofit sector worries about raising money. They worry about it more than any other topic. They see it as their biggest challenge. And with all due respect to many nonprofit founders and CEOs, an awful lot of people go into leadership because they have a passion for the mission, but they're not particularly well equipped to raise money or to handle the business aspects, ensuring that we're recruiting and retaining the right talent, managing our funds for sustainability, and raising money in efficient and effective ways. Which leads us to the question of what productivity really means. There's an extremely simple concept which actually states it pretty well: the ability to do more with less. And what we have seen that idea misused, where we're going to fire half the staff and make everybody who's left do two jobs at once. That's not what we're really talking about. We're talking about engineering in efficiency and effectiveness so that it's easier to reach particular targets. We get more out of time invested because we've done things early in the game to ensure that time is not wasted on repetitive or ineffectual efforts. And the primary thing that makes productivity really useful is maintaining the human element in all of this. Way, way back in the late 19th century, the first people to come along and talk about productivity. There's a classic story about Frederick Taylor, who sort of invented this idea, but one of his prescriptions was, oh, your people aren't shoveling enough coal fast enough into the steam engine? Let's give them bigger shovels. More coal per scoop, right? What he didn't take into account was the number of stress-related injuries and burnout that came from that flavor of so-called productivity. But there have been some very exciting changes that started to come into play after World War II in the 1950s. And some of you may be familiar with some of the names of these models. Total Quality Management, or TQM, which was succeeded by Six Sigma, which is real popular in the 90s and early 2000s. And now we've got Lean, and we've got Lean Six Sigma, we've got ITIL, and we've got 9 million alphabet soup models. But at the end of the day, they fall into these categories: process and or performance management and the performance excellence model. And there are big national and global awards given. There's the Malcolm Baldrige Award for quality in the U.S. and the Deming Prize, which is given by Japan, the government of Japan, to any company in the world. What's happened is unprecedented levels of productivity, and even more important, of innovation in businesses worldwide. And if anybody listening to us has used a cellular telephone for more than 5 years, you know what we're talking about. We've gone from just a device to make a phone call to my entire life is on here, and I can run my business from something that weighs 6 ounces.
And the question that Ellen and I have raised all along throughout this process is, why are we not using these methods in fundraising? And I think there's several reasons for that. In my experience, whenever I talk to nonprofits, it's like, well, we're different. We can't operate like a business. I know our board members tell us we should operate more like a business, but we're a nonprofit. And believe it or not, there are still some people out there who think that a nonprofit means that you have to operate in the red, that you can't show an income at the end of the year. I know that we'd all be probably out of business if we did that for more than a year. But there are still people who think of nonprofits as, well, we have to be this poor nonprofit going with our hat in hand to ask for money because we don't want people to think we're too successful or they won't donate to us. In fact, I once had a board member who didn't want to replace the rug in my office, which had a big hole in it, because he didn't want people to think that we were too well off or they'd stop giving money. And I turned that around then, and because I happened to know that he was a graduate of MIT, and I said, do you think that MIT is raising money because they look poor? I don't think so. But unfortunately, that's what happens in this sector.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned MIT because I was thinking about Harvard. Nobody thinks Harvard or MIT need money.
Right.
Anybody in the know knows that Harvard has an endowment in the billions, and yet they get more money every year than the rest of us do now, don't they?
Yes, they sure do. And yes, the nonprofit sector is different in many ways from the for-profit sector. We have governing boards that operate differently than a board of a corporation in some ways, and in some ways they operate similar. But there are still some practices that can be introduced into the nonprofit sector that are going to show the community that you're operating with, as Ellen said, efficiency and effectiveness, and those two things are both important. You can't have one without the other. You can be effective at delivering your programs, but if you're not operating efficiently, you're not going to have the money to keep funding those programs, and so your effectiveness is going to wane along with your efficiency. So, Ellen, let's talk about how we can change
Well,
this.
right, and this is where the notion of the fundraising revolution comes in. The revolution we propose is to change, actually to change radically, the way we manage the fundraising effort, not the way we do fundraising. If Linda's been a major gift officer and a chief development officer and a grant writer and done all of those things, and the fact is we can look across the board at the 30,000 members of AFP, and most of them have a great deal of expertise in the doing of fundraising. There's a lot of skill. Anybody who's not, anybody who's been in the business for a few years knows how to write a case for support, develop a decent grant application, cultivate a donor, run an event, and so on and so forth, design a direct mail or direct appeal campaign. That's not stuff that needs a lot of attention from us, although Linda certainly provides a lot of training and books about the skills of doing fundraising. The big difference we want to propose is how we manage fundraising. And I want to say that this is not simply let's do it the way business does it, because businesses don't do this all that great either. But this is a way to propose great management, principles of greatness, not simply principles of business. So let me share with you 6 principles of great management. And great management, I want to make sure you understand, is different from terrible management. That's easy to understand. But it's also different from merely good management. So the 6 principles are: define the what first. The what is performance targets, the evidence we're seeking, the indicators we want to use, the way we'll measure success, and how much success is desirable. We don't need to tell people the how if we're managing. Then the next thing is no change either to the what or to the how without evidence. This is a critical issue. It's not particularly well managed across the board in the corporate world, and it's certainly not managed terribly well in the nonprofit world, where we need to have data that says, we need to do something differently rather than throwing yet another event, for example. A third principle is transform the subjective to the objective. We have evidence that this works, we have evidence that that doesn't work, as opposed to, I don't like what you did, or, well, I couldn't do this because so-and-so was mean to me. A fourth principle is to establish standards. Standard benchmarks. We're going to talk about a critical benchmark, that is how you select your donor prospects in the first place. Standard guidelines of how to do things so that people aren't reinventing the wheel every time they do them. Performance metrics, which we've mentioned a million times. Analytical reports and reporting methods that are really clear and diagnostic. The fifth principle is to measure the same things the same way every time. This is really interesting because we see that this principle is violated very often. And we'll talk about that as we go forward. And the sixth principle is that when we meet with our teams, we review progress against our plan religiously. We don't put it off until a quarterly review, or worst of all, oh my God, the end of the year is coming up, let's review what we've done. We look at our progress against plan regularly. at least once a month, and then peel back the onion to figure out what we could have done or might consider doing differently upstream to get more desirable results downstream.
Right. And I think, Ellen, the key to that is that last item that you said, review against your plan religiously. That, of course, assumes that you have a plan. And this is where, some organizations don't have any. I'll tell you, we were just amazed at some of the results of this leaky bucket assessment, that some people weren't even measuring at the end. They weren't even measuring how much money they raised every year, or if they were
Right.
measuring it, they were measuring their overall goal, and they weren't figuring out how much they were raising through special events, how much did their direct mail bring in, how much were they raising from their website, how much were they bringing in from major gifts. They're just kind of lumping everything together and saying, okay, we met our goal or we didn't meet our goal. And what you have to do is really pay attention to the beginning, because the end takes care of itself. I've often gotten on an airplane, and I happen to fly Southwest a lot, so it's no assigned seating. You just grab the seat that's good for you. And nobody ever wants to sit in the back of the plane. And somebody sitting next to me once said, the back of the plane's going to get here the same time the front of the plane gets here. And I said, yes, that's very true. And sometimes we don't think about that. We don't think about the fact that if the pilot is operating right and he gets the beginning of the plane to land, the end of the plane's going to land too. And I think
love that.
that's so true in so many cases, that we focus on the end, and we wait, as Ellen said, till the end of the year to say, oh my gosh, we're $20,000 short of our goal, or $100,000 short of our goal, or $500,000 short of our goal.
And then we start running around like a chicken without a head.
Exactly. And what we need to do is focus on what's happening up front. Do we have enough prospects in our pipeline to reach our goal in major gifts? Have we planned this event right? And we know that enough people are going to attend, not wait until 2 days before the event. I actually had a client once that was less than a week away from their event, and they had 4 people signed up or something, and she was burst into tears because she didn't know what to do. And I thought, first of all, probably that event wasn't the right event for this organization, or they wouldn't have gotten themselves to that predicament. But we focus so much on what's going to happen at the end of this. Are we going to meet our goal or not? And we don't focus enough on making that plan in the beginning and looking at evaluating it on a regular basis, monthly, or at the very minimal quarterly, not waiting till the end of the year. So let's try to focus more on the beginning of the event. And I think it's one of the aspects of this that we found really important was creating a donor profile. When you come to your donors, who is the right donor for your organization? And a lot of people will say, well, anybody that has money, anybody that has a pulse, we go after anybody. And you may be wasting a lot of your time. This is where that effectiveness and efficiency really pay off, because you could be wasting an awful lot of time looking at bringing in money from just anybody and everybody, and not focusing on the people that are really most likely to give to your organization. And so this donor profile is such a critical aspect of this, but it's unfortunately not a common practice. When we looked at the leaky bucket results, 15% of people had absolutely no criteria to figure out who their best donors were. 61% said, well, yeah, we kind of know who they are, but nothing's documented. And unfortunately, 17% of the people only looked at things like the wealth profile. Does this person have a lot of money? And let's face it, everybody in every community, I don't care if you're a small rural community with, less than 1,000 people in your county, or if you're a big metropolitan area like San Francisco or New York or Houston, Texas, every community has people with wealth. But are those people going to give to your organization? Maybe, but probably not. So you've got to develop a donor profile that looks at both capacity and motivation. And we were just shocked to see that only 6% of people did this. And that just blows my mind, because people aren't going to give to you just because they have the money. You know, everybody wants to get money from Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg and Oprah Winfrey and, you know, the usual suspects. Yes, they certainly have the capacity, but are they motivated to give to your organization? So what's exciting about this Smart Way process is creating a donor profile, and it's really an interesting exercise that we've walked our clients through. So I'm going to let Ellen tell you how we develop the ideal donor scorecard, because it's really a great way to focus your energy on the prospects that are more likely to give to your organization.
Absolutely. This is an example of the Smart Way Prospect Scorecard. And by the way, if you buy Fundraising the Smart Way, the book that Wiley published for me, there's a companion website where you can get a template, this template, and download it. Now, every agency's, the criteria within every agency differ. But this is an example from a hypothetical agency we use in our training called the Arboretum. And what we did here was we put together a series of capacity criteria. These are the wealth profiles that people commonly use. Excuse me. And we call them the facts and specifics. So this might include the standard demographics, giving capacity that we'd get from a wealth engine or a donor search, and many other criteria like that. But there are also sometimes some other criteria, like they've been giving to us for more than X years, or they're an active member of our volunteer committee, whatever. Then there's a set of value statements, which represent the client, or the donor's motivations for giving. Coming up with the value statements is actually a quite rigorous form of market research, where we end up with just 4 to 7 highly diagnostic statements about the fact that donors are only right for us if they share our values, if they want what we have to offer. And there's a third set of criteria that you can't see here that we call the danger signs, which remind us that even if the donor has the right capacity and is reasonable in terms of a match to our value added, there may be some issues that make the donor less appealing, or even a complete no-no, such as big talk, no action, wants more recognition than is appropriate for the size of their gift, or even than you're allowed to or capable of providing. One of the worst danger signs we've seen is the donor who wants to give a gift that will take you off mission. So this is, besides being a great tool, it matches the take care of the beginning issue. We now know who we want to go after. It reduces the problem of lost donors, because if we're recruiting donors based on these criteria, it's going to be a lot easier to retain them than it is when we ask our board members to go twist the arms of their affluent friends. And this also is what's considered a benchmark, one of those excellent management tools and a principle of great management. So what happens when you have a good benchmark for prospect selection and cultivation is that you waste a whole lot less time on prospects that are dead on arrival, the DOAs we call them. And Time is both your scarcest and most costly resource. It's not elastic. There's only 24 hours in a day. You have to spend, I would hope, 7 or 8 of them sleeping, and you can't work all of your waking hours. So you waste less time, which means you have more time to devote to high potential funding sources and funding activities, which means your fundraising resources, be they staff, contractors, technology, or volunteers, you get more out of them with greater delight on their part. And I mean that. I'm not being fanciful here. When you're not exhausted and burned out and constantly being rejected, when your proportion of successful engagement goes up compared to the losses, you enjoy your job as a fundraising professional more. You get engaged with your funders at a deeper level. P.S. helps retention. Costs go down, income goes up.
Okay, so let's talk about some more of the metrics that we discovered in the leaky bucket assessment. And again, we find that while all of these things people agree are good ideas, they're just not in common practice. And we asked people whether they had metrics established to acquire donors, and about 62% said they had either no metrics or they encouraged a new donor acquisition, but they really didn't have any plan or method to do it and to measure it. The same thing
Yeah,
with,
no targets,
right,
right.
there were just no targets in place. And if you go back to that fundraising effectiveness project and look at how many new donors were acquired and how many were lost, you can see that donor retention, which should be even more important than donor acquisition in some ways, was even worse. 72%, almost 3/4 of the people, said they had no metrics to retain donors, or, oh, yeah, they encouraged donor retention. But that's a very vague word. Encouraged, you can't measure. You know, was I encouraged to be, say, a donor of yours or not? I don't know. How do I measure that? Because everybody's definition of encouragement may be different. You've got to have real targets that are measurable so that you can say, well, you know, we lost 8% of our donors, or we lost 100% of our donors, or we managed to retain 100% of our donors. And that, of course, is the ideal. But
Mm-hmm.
the fact that only that 72% had no metrics at all, or just said they were encouraged, was really scary. And you can see this progression gets worse. Another thing that's important is upgrading your donors. You might have a donor that gives you $50 a year, but they've given that for the last 40 years. Well, is it time maybe that they could give you more than $50? And more than 3/4 of the people said they had no metrics, no plan, no uh, des- decision on how they were going to actually get donors to be upgraded. We use two terms, upselling and cross-selling, which I know those are sales terms and foreign to your ears probably, but upselling and cross-selling are just as important to the nonprofit sector as they are to McDonald's, who, when you go in to order your hamburger, says, "Do you want fries with that?"
That's a great example of upselling and
And
cross-selling all in
cross-selling.
one package.
Yeah, they're going to get you to spend more, plus they're going to sell you a new product and probably get you hooked on
Right.
French fries. And this is what
Oh, and after you say yes to the French fries, then they ask, "Do you want me to supersize it?"
supersize it, right? And you want a 97-gallon jug of soda to carry out the door with you. But
On wheels.
this is what we don't do in the nonprofit sector, because we think, oh, well, that's sales. That's foreign to us. We can't think like that. But you can. You've got to think about upgrading your donors, because you're going to lose some donors. Let's face it, a few of them are actually going to die or move away or lose all their money in a divorce or a bankruptcy or something. So there are always going to be some donors lost. That's why that donor retention and upgrading and cross selling your donors into different products. Maybe they always give to your music program if you're a school for the performing arts, but maybe they've never given to the dance program, and maybe they're also interested in dance if they're interested in music. So these are the kind of things that you have to figure out what kind of metrics are reasonable for your organization. And maybe the first year it's going to be a little harder to set those metrics, but set something as a goal so you can go back and measure it. And if next year you find out that your goals were too aggressive or not aggressive enough, they can be adjusted the following year. But please, please, please set some kind of goals and establish metrics for these things, because otherwise you're just shooting in the dark and you have no idea what's working and what's not
Right.
working.
And shooting in the dark adds to the complexity and uncertainty of fundraising, which are really terribly draining to the staff.
Right.
When people know what's expected of them, they tend to perform better. So this is part of the revolution in fundraising management. We're not doing our fundraising staff any favors here by failing to give them these targets. And then once you give them the targets, reassuring them, not reaching the targets doesn't mean you're out on your ear. It means this is welcome information. We need to understand why we're not meeting our targets.
Right.
We're going to talk about that a little bit more as we go along.
Okay. And the other thing that's important is, we often talk about the tail wagging the dog, and unfortunately, this is what happens when we only measure things after the process is complete. We really haven't learned anything about the process, and this was another, really, a lot of this information in this leaky bucket was just so eye-opening to me and so frightening to think that 63% of the people did track their total income, which is a trailing indicator. And that raises two questions. One is, what on earth are the other 37% doing if they're not even tracking their total income? I mean, somebody's got to be questioning this. The CFO, the executive director, the board should be questioning these things. This is where we mentioned earlier things that sometimes it's a failure in leadership. But only slightly more than half actually tracked it by category. And this is where you get into the rut of let's write more grants or let's do another special event, because you're not tracking how much money you're bringing in from each type of fundraising that you do. And if you sit
Right.
down and do that, then it only makes logical sense that you're going to focus on the things that bring in more money and not so much on the things that bring in less. So again, these are trailing indicators, but at least there's some kind of measurement. Um, but only 45%, less than half of the people were using leading indicators. And we found a whole lot of people saying things like, well, we encourage that, but we don't really document it. So you've got to start focusing on those leading indicators, the things that are happening upstream before the event happens or before the grants are written and you find out how many of them said yes or how many said no. Focus on some of the leading indicators, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about that, but those are the kind of things that I think are really critical for us. So I'm going to let Ellen talk to you about donor moves and move management on steroids, which I love.
Well, um, many of us in the nonprofit sector are very familiar with the moves management model, which was introduced in the 1970s, and it's a marvelous, extremely useful model with two, and I have two critiques of the model. The first critique of the model is it hasn't really evolved. You might remember that I mentioned Frederick Taylor, who introduced efficiency. He was the world's first efficiency expert back in the 1890s, and he wasn't thinking at all about effectiveness. So the Taylor model of efficiency has evolved and evolved and evolved and evolved. And we now have very, very sophisticated ways to measure and manage productivity. Moves management has not evolved very much, And it's largely a method of mapping out how to manage major gift cultivation. So I thought about something that I've been aware of. I spent my first 20 years in business as a major account salesperson and account manager and sales manager for huge accounts. And we were always paying attention to our pipeline. One of the critical elements of any pipeline in corporate sales is a function called opportunity stages. Opportunity stages are really useful because they tell us where is this next opportunity for a gift or a grant or corporate underwriting along the arc of cultivation. Have we just met them and started to get to know each other? Have we gotten to the point where a proposal's been offered to the donor or corporate underwriter? Are we negotiating the deal? And so on. So we decided to call our opportunity stages donor moves in honor of moves management. And as you'll see from this little graphic here, it's a circular process. And there are only 8 stages to the process. The process describes the funder's giving process, not the fundraiser's getting process. And there is a big difference here. And that is the stages that the prospective funder goes through, which happen within the 4 walls of their organization or between the ears of the individual donors. It's a fairly constant set of stages. Do they like us? Do we like them? Are they willing to consider making a gift? And so on. The advantage here is these first 4 moves. Do they have the right reasons to give to us? In other words, do they match our SmartWay prospect scorecard? If they don't match after us talking to them, we probably shouldn't go after them. And then the second move is, do they perceive value in what we're bringing to the party? In very simple words, what we're saying here is move 1 is, do they tell us enough about themselves for us to decide if they're worth pursuing? Do we like them? Move 2 is, do they like us? Are they interviewing us at the same time we're interviewing them, and they like what they hear and they like what they see? Move 3 is they indicate to us somehow that they're willing to consider making a donation to us. The fourth move is something we don't do often enough, which is get back together with them and give them a chance to negotiate the terms or the scope or the size or the payment schedule or the color of the fountain pen that they want to use to go forward. The fifth move is the money shot. That's where they say yes, they write the check, they honor the pledge, they make a bank transfer, whatever it is. Now, notice that there are 3 more stages here. And after they give to us, we move into stewardship. We get back to them to find out, are we doing what we said we'd do? Are you satisfied being a donor to us? Have we followed through the way we had promised, and so on? We then go back in and resell them. We retain them, we get them to give again, we upgrade them or something, and we encourage them to refer others to us or refer us to others. And guess what? Then we start all over again. Let me make a comment here. We don't do this one at a time for every $50 gift. We only manage a pipeline of larger opportunities. But you're the one who gets to decide what's a large opportunity. For a startup, a large opportunity might be $500 to $1,000. For a major hospital, the small gift, or we're only going to track gifts that are $25,000 or $50,000. And in the meanwhile, we can use similar tactics to assess our online giving as a group, our annual appeal as a group, and so on. But having these, what, Linda?
I was just going to add something. What I think is really great about this process is if you look at the difference between this and moves management. Moves management is about the moves that you as a development officer or someone else in your organization is making. But this focuses on the donor's interest. The donor is sharing their reasons to give. The donor sees value. The donor honors their pledge. The donor gives feedback and gives again and refers. It's focused on the moves of the donor rather than on what you as a development person are doing. And that's all part of it. I mean, your moves have to blend in with this, right?
Yeah, you have to do stuff so that the donor will take these actions.
Right.
But if we're focusing on whether or not, you did 700 things, including, riding around on a unicycle while juggling, and the donor still hasn't shared their reasons to give, there's something wrong there, right? And so Penelope Burke and her big contributions to donor-centered leadership, donor-centered world, I can't remember her complete phrase. We're right in alignment with this notion because these stages are fewer in number and they're chock full of leading indicators. Moves 1 through 4 are leading indicators. Move 5 is a trailing indicator, and then guess what? Move 6 through 8 are leading indicators again. So we've got leading indicators. We've got a true focus on funder actions, and here's something that's really great. When you run your pipeline or keep track of your pipeline using these techniques, you end up with stuff that can be measured easily. The data can be captured easily. I made up some words here: capturable, reportable, and analyzable. So you can capture the data with ease, whether you're working on an automated platform or a spreadsheet. You can report on the data with ease, and then you can analyze the data with relative ease. And then we want to share some, again, anecdotal information. This is one of our first CEOs who said, and I just love this, I said, "How are you doing?" This was just a few weeks after we had completed our project to help them implement this model. And she said, "Well, I can tell you one thing, I'm not as tired as I used to be at the end of the week. Oh, and we've brought in more new money from more new funders." I love that. More than one board chair has said, "Boy, this is the information we've been looking for years. None of us, either on the board or on the staff, could quite figure out how to give this, how to obtain this information." And, here's just a few more. Linda and I are currently working with an international agency, and they have chosen to adopt this model because they believe we're only 1 month into the project. So don't hold us to this yet. But they told us that they believed this kind of approach would enable them to triple in size over the next few years. They're actually looking to triple in, what did they say, 5 to 7 years, I think.
I think it might have even been less than that. Five, I think, was probably.
Well, let's not
I'm
make any
trying.
claims we can't substantiate yet, but it's been pretty exciting. So I wanted to just make a recommendation. We really didn't want to make this program all about you should buy the book. We really wanted to make it about why you guys could benefit from thinking about utilizing performance management techniques that have been proven in the crucible of time and use for the past 70 years. There's no reason we shouldn't be using these principles of great management. Performance metrics around income acquisition, retention, and improvement, around managing our staff, around adopting leading indicators, and so on. You can order this online. If you order it online directly from Bristol Strategy Group, we are running a special. We're going to be running it a couple of times, and we'll have a note about that special offer on the home page where you can buy it buy the book at a substantial discount. And once we have proof of purchase, we'll give you some additional goodies. And Linda, you want to describe our
Sure, that we have
programs for adopting the smart way?
If you're interested in pursuing this a little bit further, we do have programs for smaller agencies where we bring 5 agencies together, and you can send up to 4 people from each agency. So we would recommend probably your chief development officer if you have one, your CEO if everybody has a CEO, maybe your board chair or chair of your development committee, but up to 4 people can come from each agency, and the whole program takes about 3 months. It's delivered by way of 5 online sessions of 90 minutes each. And then once the sessions are completed, we do a support of 6 group coaching sessions where this is all done virtually. You don't have to get on a plane and fly anywhere. You can do this from your office at the comfort of your computer. And then for larger,
your fuzzy slippers.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, because even your people could be at different locations. Maybe your board chair wants to do it from her office, and your development people are in your office. But each agency then will receive 1 private consulting session just to focus on their needs and how they're doing. And then for larger agencies, they can send up to 25 people from the agency. The group we're working with has about 15 different development major gift officers, and some of their other development folks are involved as well. And there we also do the 5 training sessions online, but then the number of coaching sessions is based on each organization's needs. So either way, this is a program that you can do without a huge investment of time and money. You don't have to fly somewhere and stay in a hotel. It's all done from your office and from your computer.
And we want to make it easy for you guys to talk with us at any time. So you can always call me or email me at ellen@bristolstrategygroup.com, and I put my mobile number on this slide at 786-554-2666. And you can also take the leaky bucket assessment. You can either just go to Bristol Strategy Group's homepage or go to the URL bristolstrategygroup.com/nonprofit-leaky bucket. And everybody who takes the leaky bucket assessment is entitled to a free 1-hour-long private review by phone. They're usually conducted either by me or by Linda. and we arrange them at your leisure, and we break our necks not to sell you anything during these reviews.
And my information is on here as well. And just for your information, so you know, if you do want to choose to call us by phone, Ellen is in Eastern time because she's in Florida. I'm in Pacific time because I'm in Nevada. So just so you have some idea of what time of the day you're calling. But
Right.
my information as well as my website is lindalizakowski.com. And you can email me at linda@lindalizakowski.com, and you have my phone number there, and as well the leaky bucket assessment. And I really encourage you to do that. It's free of charge, and I think it'll be interesting to find out where you fall on the ranks compared to others. So now that you've seen some of the results of what some of that leaky bucket assessment is, you'll have an idea where you are. So we kind of want to thank all of you for your time. It's I know listening to these webinars sometimes can take a big chunk of your time out of the day, but we hope that we gave you enough information that you can really start thinking about fundraising the smart way. You know, years ago they used to always say, work harder, work smarter, not harder. And that's the whole concept behind this. It might seem like a lot of metrics and a lot of things to think about, but once you start measuring this, it's going to be so much easier. And once you have these ideal donor profiles in place, you'll be able to track whether you're really spending your time productively or whether you're wasting a lot of time chasing after dollars that aren't probably ever going to fall into your lap. So we want to thank you and again encourage you to contact either one of us by phone, email, or website. And
Or
do
carrier pigeon.
right. In my case, it's quail. We have carrier quail out here. They come along. I think we have a few pigeons in Las Vegas, but mostly it's carrier quail
Carrier
that we
quail.
have. Carrier quail, yeah. So thank
Well,
you again for your time. And Ellen, do you have any final words?
no, I just wanted to mention, though, that we also have the first benchmarking study has been out for a year, and we are now working on the second benchmarking study where we are presenting this program to you in 2016. So there will be another benchmarking study available, and we make those available for free.
Okay. Well, thank you all, and we look forward to hearing from you. Bye.
Bye now.